Hey guys, welcome to Bethel Online. My name is Jason. I'm one of the pastors here, and we're so glad you decided to make us a part of your weekend. No matter who you are, where you come from, we're so glad you're here. Our vision is to be a safe place for real people to encounter the real Jesus and experience real change. Our hope and our prayer is that no matter who you are or what you've been through, you know that you are loved and you are wanted here. We would love to get to know you better and help you connect with all that's going on. You can do this by going to our website at www.bethel.us or by downloading the Bethel app. You can find our app by searching Bethel Putco in your app store. Both online and in the app, you can fill out digital connection card. It only takes a minute and it'll help us know how to serve you better. Another way you can connect today is through giving. Your generosity at Bethel directly impacts God's mission to radically change people's lives in Putnam County and beyond. Through the ministries of Bethel and the many local and regional organizations we support, people are able to see the grace of God and how much He loves them. You can always give on our website at bethel.us/give or in the Bethel app. Thank you for partnering with us and making a difference. Well, thanks again for tuning in online today. Know that you are wanted and welcome here, and you are loved. I hope you all have a great day.
Good morning and welcome to Bethel Online. We're so glad you chose to join us this morning for the final sermon in a series called Choices. You see, life is filled with choices. The choices we make impact the direction that we go. Much like a fork in the road, the one we choose determines where we wind up. The choices in life can become overwhelming. And so during this series, we've explored the importance of predetermining some decisions, that when faced with this decision, this is what I'm going to do. When it comes to finishing well what I start, I want to be a finisher. As a church, when we commit to something, I want to finish what we start. It's often easy to come up with the energy to start something. It's exciting. We get exhilarated by the fact that there's something to start and something to do. We get excited by dreams and visions, and we get excited about opportunities. And I don't know about you, though. I have some things in life that I've started that I've yet to finish. But what happens when we get to a place and God has given us a vision or called us to something, or we know we should do something and we want to give up? It's so much easier to start things than to finish them, and it's so easy along the way to give up. When it comes to my own personal life, when faced with the obstacles that make me want to quit, I've pre-decided that if it's important enough or God called me to it, I want to finish it. If I've committed to someone in my life, I want to keep that commitment. It's a predetermined character decision that when it comes to my life or when it comes to the life of our church, I want us to be, and I believe God calls us to be, a finisher. God Himself finishes what He promises. He keeps His word. In a recent study, it was shown that one of the missing links between those, and one of the differences between those who actually accomplish their goals and those who do not, is just grit. The strength of character that refuses to quit. When we commit, we cannot quit. We're made to be finishers. What is the unfinished work that you've been called to do? What is the thing on your heart? Maybe it's you began a relationship with the intention of a healthy relationship and you felt like giving up. Maybe you're in the middle of parenting and it's a hard season and you feel like kind of bailing out. Or maybe you started a project that you believed had a great purpose, that it was more than just something you thought up in your head. It was something that you knew needed to happen. What is it that you've kind of quit on and left unfinished. When it comes to the life of a Christ follower, we've been given specific purposes. You and I, and each person who will watch this week or even be in person has a specific calling and purpose from God. And I wonder if you have unfinished business. In her recent book, Angela Duckworth says this: enthusiasm is common. Endurance is rare, and endurance is proven to separate those who accomplish their goals and those who do not. Many people start things. It's easy to start them. Not many finish. When it comes to our life, much is at stake with finishing what we've been called to finish to. Maybe for you, it is about a relationship. Maybe God has called you to a specific person. Maybe God has laid a person on your heart that you need to love well. Maybe God has called you to go out and finish a project. Maybe He's called you to an area of ministry. As a matter of fact, if you're a Christ follower, you have been called to service. Maybe God is calling you to be generous, and you've begun generosity habits and behaviors, but maybe you've kind of wanted to give up. Maybe you have stepped into it at some point and been discouraged. But see, enthusiasm for something is common. It's easy to get people excited. Nothing will show you more than that looking at social media and every event that happens. People show great enthusiasm or great passion about, but yet endurance is rare. In our culture, we often revere the excitable or those who get enthusiastic, but rarely celebrate those who endure. You see, the truth is, most of the time when you see a success story, you see the moment of success, but you don't see the moments of trouble and trial, and you don't see the athlete working behind the scenes. It's recently written about a particular athlete that they spend well over $1 million a year keeping themselves in physical shape. But what you see is someone with incredible physical gifts. The reality is, endurance is rarely noticed, but absolutely necessary to accomplish the goals that God has put before us. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 5 and 7, there's a passage, and the writer is a guy named Paul. Paul is writing to his understudy Timothy. And the context of this passage is that he's likely being imprisoned. He is imprisoned, and he's nearing the end of his life. He is being prepared to be put to death. His time is nearly over. And he's trying to finish his race well. He's passing off to Timothy. And he's telling Timothy this: don't be afraid of suffering for the Lord. Paul had run a long race. He had seen success and he had seen struggles. He had been imprisoned. He had been embattled with other people. He had a race to carry out. As a matter of fact, part of Paul's race was this very letter that he was penning to Timothy that we would read today. He was still carrying out while he was likely in a place that was filled with feces and dirt and disgust. He was likely in a place that was much like a sewer drain, just waiting to be killed. But he's trying to end well and pass off to Timothy. And he tells Timothy, don't be afraid of suffering for the Lord. It takes on a little different viewpoint when you realize that Paul has already seen suffering for the Lord. He's planted 13 churches around that part of the world that began to send the gospel out. He says, work at telling others the good news. See, that had been Paul's race. Paul was called to go and carry the gospel to the world. And through his letters and through the church plants that he had planted, he did just that. but he's nearing the end of his race, and he says, and fully carry out the ministry God has given you. This implies that Timothy had been given the ministry, that God had given him something to carry out. I believe you and I each have been given something to carry out. For some of you, you may be feeling a burden, and it's that very burden that you feel that God is calling you to. Have you carried out the ministry that God's given to you? For some of you, in this very moment, you're thinking about the thing that has been on your heart for a long time. And you think of all the reasons why you kind of started, but it didn't go well, or you got discouraged and you quit, or you kind of put it on the back burner and said, I'll go about that later. Or you began to see all the challenges in front of you and decided that maybe it wasn't your thing that God put on your heart. But I wonder this morning if you have unfinished business when it comes to the things of God. What is it that God has given you to finish well? Paul goes on to say, as for me, my life has been poured out as an offering to God, and the time of my death is near. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, and I have remained faithful. While it appears that Paul thought his race was over, he was actually still finishing up a key writing that has been used throughout the church, throughout history. He was still finishing his race, and ultimately Timothy would take over the ministry and would begin to carry out what God had for him. This advice, though, coming from Paul in this key moment of his life where Paul doesn't know where the legacy of his life goes, where his finishing well will carry the churches that he loved. He doesn't know how his finishing well will impact Timothy and all of the things he had poured his life out for, but he is telling Timothy the importance of finishing the race. In Revelation chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, in the letters to the churches, it talks about a church, and it says, I know this church's deeds. I know your deeds. I know what you've done, that you have a reputation of being alive, but you're dead. Wake up, strengthen what remains and is about to die, for I have found your deeds unfinished in the sight of my God. This is judgment being brought upon the churches that don't finish the work that God has for them. This is maybe an indictment that could be true about us when we don't finish what we start. I've been present for a lot of first moments in life, and I've been present for a lot of last moments in life. There's a difference in the start and the finish. At the start, there's a ton of hope. But along the way, it often becomes feelings of hopelessness and struggles and moments of doubt. What the word is saying here is don't just start. Don't just start life. Finish. For some of you this morning, it's my hope that this will jolt you back into what God called you to remind you of the passion from which you once felt about the thing that God called you to wake you up, to strengthen. He says, strengthen what remains and is about to die, for I have found your deeds unfinished in the sight of my God. What unfinished business do you have? What is it that's unfinished in your life? Parent, you held that child and you thought, I'm going to raise this child up. I'm going to help this child grow spiritually. I'm going to lead this child well. And they grew up, and all of a sudden you blinked and they've moved and they've grown, and maybe you've gone through a difficult season and you're tempted to kind of bail out because the difficult conversations that you have to have and the amount of effort that it takes has been a lot. Maybe it's time to get back in the game. Maybe you stood on a stage or on a platform and you looked another human being in the eye and you promised that you would love them for better, for worse, but it's been worse and you're about to give up. Maybe you stepped out and took a huge risk, and for years you haven't felt like you were getting anywhere. And while it might be a good time to look and evaluate how you're going about it, you're tempted to quit. I think so many times we never accomplish what God has for us because we let the discouragement stop us. And so many times we're near a breakthrough, but we take our foot off the gas. And we're only as stuck as our grit or our will to continue on. What's your unfinished business? What is it that you have yet to finish? Recently, I read a quote that said, much of the stress we experience has less to do with our load of chores and more to do with what we have yet to finish. For some of you, you may have come to this place this morning and life just feels like a bundle of stress, and you think if I had less to do, I wouldn't be so stressed. And the reality is one of the ways to have less to do is to get busy doing what you need to do. To begin to check off the list, the things, the calling God has given you. Paul says this in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 10 and 11. Here's my advice for you. It would be good for you to finish what you started a year ago. Last year, you were the first who wanted, he's talking to the people in Corinth, he said, you were the first who wanted to give, and you were the first to begin doing it. Now you should finish what you started. I wonder how many great things, great ministries have been missed because we quit. Let me be really honest. My passion for this message is that over the years, I've watched communities implode because people lost sight of what they were called to do. I've watched families implode because someone left the game. We all love to watch the sporting event with the last minute comeback, the impossible comeback. But so many times those games are won not in the moment of the final shot, but somewhere along the way when someone refuses to allow discouragement to make them give up. Moms, dads, please, 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 no matter how discouraged you are, stay in the game. That person in your life that you love, that you want to see come to a relationship with Jesus, but you just don't see it ever happening. Stay in the game. It might be that the burden God gave you gives you a very place in that story, and it will give you an opportunity in the future to play a part of that very thing God placed on your heart. There's no burden that God placed on your heart that He can't carry you through. If we could just be honest for a minute, what is it? I would even encourage you to pause and stop the video for a minute and begin to ask God to move through His Spirit to point out the thing you've given up on. Because when it comes to Jesus, there's nothing unredeemable. That God can take us to what He's calling us to. He can take us through it and to it. What is your unfinished business? Maybe you've settled for an average marriage because, like horseshoes and hand grenades, close is good enough to you. And maybe you've kind of quit chasing after and pursuing your spouse because they're not going to go anywhere. But God called you to a healthy relationship. What about that sin that you've said over and over and over again, I need to get past that? What is it? And you've said, well, I'm going to try to grow in all these areas, but that's just one. I've just lost that. I can't get better. I can't quit that. I don't have any fight left in me. I've failed too many times. When Paul tells them to finish what they started a year ago, I think it's a message to all of us who start important things. If it was worth starting, it's worth finishing. Maybe today you reach out and begin to see, hey, how it is that I get to a healthier place in my relationship with Jesus. Maybe you reach out and say, you begin to look for how can I have healthier relationships with my children? Or maybe what I'm doing isn't working in my marriage, and maybe it's time for me to fight for it, to stay in the game, to have that grit, that gritting of our teeth that says, I might be down and out. This might be hard, but when it comes to my life, when I commit, I don't quit. He says, now you should finish what you start. In Acts chapter 20, verse 24, he says, however, I consider my life worth nothing to me. My only aim is to finish the race and complete the task. That's where most people quit quoting this verse, and they miss something really important. Paul says this, however, I consider my life worth nothing to me. My only aim is to finish the race and complete the task that the Lord Jesus has given me. The task of testifying to the good news of God's grace. Why was Paul able to finish the race? Because he was valuing that God had given him the race. Now listen, there are some things in life by all means you should probably quit. But when it comes to something, a task given by Jesus who loves us and is good and has given us a good calling, we've got to stay in the game. You see, it was the fuel from the fact that it had come from Jesus that he had been called to take the word to the world. That was how he finished. Paul said, I consider my life worth nothing to me. Oftentimes, we don't finish the call of God because our comfort is worth more to us. We don't finish the call of God in our relationships because our comfort and our preferences are over God. Paul said, I consider my life worth nothing to me. In 1992, in 400 meters at a major track and field event, a gentleman began to run the race. It's one of the most powerful clips I've ever seen. Man begins to run his race, and as he gets out to 19 seconds, he's in third place, but he's gaining ground, and a muscle in the back of his leg begins to ball up. And in deep agony and pain, he tries to finish the race. I know this about you, that some of the things I'm talking about this morning, they bring you deep pain. And you feel like you're hobbling and you can't finish what you started. But as he came down the back straightaway of his race, a man came out of the stands. As the man ran up to him to help him finish the race, and he finishes the race far behind, but yet he finished, and it's later revealed that it was the man's father. It's a heart-wrenching video. But it gets me because so often we think we're running the race all by ourselves. The reason Paul could follow Jesus all the way to his death and carry out the purpose God had given for him wasn't just his grit and strength. It was the God who was going with him while he was grittily finishing what God had called him to finish. For some of you today, your race is just beginning. You're excited and you're enthused about something, and God has called you to it, but God has also called you to finish it. The way that you will complete what God has called you to will take grit and it will involve pain. As a matter of fact, sometimes following Jesus guarantees some pain. But thankfully, he is a God who keeps his promises and goes with us. In the same way that Father came out of the stands to help his son finish the race, you have a good God in heaven who gives you a good calling worth finishing. As a church, It's our heart to be a church that helps people encounter Jesus and experience what God has for them. There'll be challenges along the way. It's not always going to be easy, but as a church, can we commit to finish what we start? To carry out the purpose and the calling God's given us? You see, carrying out the purpose God has given us can make a massive difference in our local community and even go out into the world. We can't afford not to finish what we start. You know how we finish? One step at a time. Maybe it's a hobbled step, or maybe it's a wide stride. You finishing the game matters and makes a difference. You may feel like nothing's missing because you stopped something God called you to, but I promise you it's a part of God's plan for your life and for the best for you. That you'll know Him through walking with Him to finish the race well. Being confident of this, that He who began a good work in you will carry it out to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. Let's be finishers, church. I love you, Bethel. Have a great week.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Are you ready to take your next step? We would love to hear from you. You can send an email to hello@bethel.us. You can send us a message on Facebook, or you can let us know in the Bethel app. And speaking of the Bethel app, take a moment, if you haven't already, to go to your app store and search Bethel Putco to download our app. There's all kinds of great resources in the app. You can listen to messages, you can view the messages from Sunday morning, and you can also fill out a digital Connect card. You can do that today and each week to let us know that you're tuning in. You can also find some great information about our Bethel Kids Ministry and our Be The One student ministries. Also in the app, you can give. It's one of 3 ways you can give: with online giving at bethel.us/give, in our app, Bethel Putco, or through text. Hey, thanks again for joining us. We hope you have a great day and know that you are loved.